Hey everyone, and welcome back to Brothers of the Arcana. As usual, I am Alex Aldea.
I am your co-host, Dave Ferrigno.
And with us this afternoon, we have...
I'm Nick Stevens. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. This is Captain Nick Stevens, U.S. Army retired.
Previous
Life, former Ranger.
Yep.
And author of the wonderful book entitled
Combat Bureaucrat.
Bureaucrat. Pushing pencils under fire.
Yep.
Awesome. I've read that book, or most of it, and I have with our ceaseless research, we have come up with some amazing questions for you on this fine show. Nick happens to be a personal friend, and we are going to chat. We're going to chat with him today about all things military and industrial and complex and simple, and about people and men and about drones. So we got all kinds of things. Dave, start us off because I'm babbling.
Those wonderful NJ drones. Is that where we're going today? So, well, I obviously, first of all, thank you for your service.
Oh, thank you.
It's truly anybody that serves this country, especially, putting their self in harm's way. We truly appreciate. We have such gratitude and admiration for everyone out there. And, thank you to you and everybody, who's come before you and after you as well. So we'll just put that out there first. Yeah. So from that perspective, lately, the drones of New Jersey, that's been a hot topic in the news lately. What would you say from your past life, as you put it?
Yeah.
Do you think it's military? Do you think it's government? Do you think this is aliens? Where are we going?
No, clearly aliens. Alex and I were talking about this a little bit earlier today, and honestly, I had kind of missed story beats. It's so funny that so much of our news cycle just gets swallowed up in the national stories and everything. Mm-hmm. Something very strange right outside your door doesn't get covered. I think I had to scroll a little bit before I was like, wait, I live in New Jersey. wait a tick. But judging from really kind of the lack of unified response from the government, it leads me to believe it's probably us, at some level. And a lot of these agencies, a few of them in particular, are notorious about not talking to
yes.
one another. The CIA, of course, comes to mind. And then, I have some stories about them in Afghanistan, but
oh, geez.
Yeah, just more not stories, basically. Finding out after the fact what they were doing, type stuff. And then, the Secret Service is another one too that you really doesn't share a lot of information.
Well,
we just had a new president get elected who has a lot of holdings in New Jersey too. I would not be surprised if it's something with the Secret Service. But really, all I have is conjecture.
Right. Yeah, I don't think we have any insider information on that front. But one thing, it's interesting because in the last couple of days, the narrative shifted a little bit. You got the Pentagon saying it's definitely aliens. Then you have, now there's
Project Blue Beam.
Yes, Project Blue Beam has come up many times now. But there's also this whole rhetoric going on currently that they think that there's some kind of nuclear waste that has gone missing. There's also rhetoric that supposedly there was a nuclear warhead from Ukraine that may have made its way over to the United States. Is this going to be more of a black swan, false flag kind of thing? Who knows? But, I think, is it psychological warfare? Who knows? It's, but I've personally seen a bunch of these drones because I live right next to Morristown Airport practically. And, I just kind of wave to them every time they fly by. It's like, I'm not worried about it, but it seems like the entire world, you look at our Ring cameras and everybody posts every second of the day. It's just like, oh my God, I saw a drone. It's like, actually that's a 737. It's a United flight. But hey, I guess everybody forgets Newark Airport and Teterboro. You got obviously JFK LaGuardia. Even that post last week I saw on X, there was, off the coastline, they were showing all these lights in the sky and they're like, oh, it's definitely UAPs. And it's just like, well, that's also the flight pattern into JFK tonight. So maybe that could be something as well.
You always find more stuff when you're looking for it.
Yeah, exactly.
Isn't that the truth?
It's strange how that works. Yeah.
So, two things on that. Number one, my good buddy, who's a recent addition to the fraternity. So, as most guys know, we're Freemasons, Dave and myself. Nick is not, but maybe someday, Nick. Maybe someday.
Unwashed Philistine.
You play your cards right. You too could waste your time at a lot of installations and everything. No. It's actually a lot of fun. We have a really good time in the fraternity, but you have to have the time for it. And with two young kids, it's tough to get things out there. But my point is that there's a lot of guys with a lot of opinions, especially as regards that type of stuff. You get into conspiracy theories and such. We recently met at the installation for Acacia Lodge at St. John's a couple of days ago. A young guy who's a Mason from Massachusetts, New Hampshire area. He deals in decommissioning nuclear sites. And so it's exactly, we want to have him on the podcast talking about this stuff because, if they're saying, well, there's stuff that's missing, there's three reactors currently in New Jersey. And there's apparently talk about putting in some more. And his whole thing is, well, what do you do with these nuclear, these parcels or packages of nuclear waste or depleted rods, which apparently you can do all kinds of things to these rods. You're not allowed to do them in America, but in France and other places, these rods aren't quite really depleted. So you could do something to reinvigorate them, and then you can use them again. But you reusing these things, you're not allowed to do in America, or whatever the case may be. And he told me something very interesting, because they always say when they decommission or they turn off the reactors, you see all the fish, and they've died, and the radiation's killed the fish. No, it wasn't. It was hot water that was coming out of there, and the fish really like the hot water. And when the hot water's done or gone, those fish die. And so, it's that kind of thing. So it's kind of nutty. But
a nuclear reactor is really just an elaborate steam engine. Like with extra steps. So a lot of people like to throw in all the the fantastical, the three-headed or three-eyed Simpsons fish, with it's now that.
Does the thing have a name? I mean, it's been around forever.
No,
you'd imagine
it
name that thing.
It should at that point, right? I don't think it does.
Little 3-eye.
As a Simpsons expert, I should know.
We brought you on to talk about the Simpsons. Your vast knowledge.
Hard left turn here.
Absolutely.
Oh, look. The three-eyed fish on The Simpsons is called Blinky.
Oh, there you go.
Well, Blinky, yes, three-eyed fish found on The Simpsons. Wonderful. Vote Quimby. Absolutely. Thank you, our erstwhile stalwart producer. Yep. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it, Percussion. So with that, the show's about esoteric topics, to some extent, some kind of men's issues or just people issues. How do we get from point A to point B being enlightenment, and things of that nature. So you have gone through quite a lot of stuff in your life, whether it's early stuff or going into the military space. And I dare say that has affected you in different ways and different ideas. You've written a book about it, which means you cared enough to do all that research and put those ideas out into formation. So let me ask you this. How did your experiences in Afghanistan sort of shape your personal development? In other words, what lessons did you sort of learn that you had before about resilience, about leadership, and about adaptability during your deployment?
So, any combat deployment, right? Like any time you're, in the military, like you gear your entire existence towards that thing, right? And then you do it. The only thing I could liken it to is you can read about it, you can learn as much as you can. It never prepares you for the experience, right? Like no matter how much training or how much they try to make it realistic, it's kind of like being a parent, right? Like people can talk about it, you can read all the books and everything, but until you've done it, Like you're not really going to know what it's like to go on day 5 of hardly any sleep and kids screaming in the background, and you get to play the game. Is that poop or is that chocolate? Like until you've been there,
Yeah.
it's hard. It's hard to conceptualize.
How often does that game get to actually tasting poop or chocolate?
It's too fresh. Too fresh. But so a lot of the strategies they give you and everything, they don't work. They don't work, or you find new ones along the way and everything too. I was fortunate. I was an officer, right? So I was a captain. I was in charge of a company-sized element, right? Worked as a second in command, as a first lieutenant for a bit. So I had quite a few soldiers under me. So I didn't really have to focus on myself that much. Everything was always like, are these soldiers fed? Are they safe? Are we able to do our mission? Right? Like, can we achieve all of these things, right, within a reasonable, and then for half a second, I got to think about myself and I passed out like at night. That was kind of it. So really the coping strategies, the mechanisms of self-development and growth, everything kind of came afterward. Coming back, redeployment, reintegration, all that stuff like that. That's where you kind of had to figure out what worked and what didn't, right? So, and I'll tell you, I went through a lot of what didn't.
Well, that's part of it, right? So when you say reintegration,
yeah,
it's easy to reintegrate. Well, like I say, easy. It's easier to reintegrate into society on any meaningful level. Finding a job, learning to have a relationship, all of the various things that you're sort of expected to do, but reintegrating mentally, and even if you reintegrate into a schedule, having that, turning off that animalistic side of you that's just doesn't care anymore because you're in war, disassociative or whatever the case may be, and on some level allowing that to, well, let me not assume anything. Is it easily done? Can you come back to true kind of thing after these types of things? Yes and no, because you've affected when you go through combat, right? Like when you've been through, and I was in a combat unit. I was a paratrooper in the 173rd. So we had a year-long deployment, like at the time. So the vast majority of that, I'd say about 10 months out of that, other than when the passes were frozen, effectively. Taliban didn't like to fight when it was frozen. So you're dealing with some form of contact, whether you're getting bombarded, you're dealing with firefights, ambushes, whatever, for about 10 months, right? And you redefine what true is. You redefine what your baseline is. So there isn't this. It's trying to like unexplode a hand grenade, right? Like that's done. Like you're not that person anymore. There is no home anymore to return to, right? Because you've blown it up effectively, right? So finding what to do with like what you have left, I think is kind of like the strategy for it, right? The closest thing I could probably equate it to would be, have you ever talked to like really hardcore drug addicts, like people who've done like heroin? Yeah,
like
sure.
Like that too. And then they have like their first kid or something like that. They're like, wow, holding my kid's pretty cool. Almost as cool as that time I did heroin. Like it changes everything, right? So when I came back, everything felt like a cartoon, right? Like getting a job, answering, with a straight face, like police officer questions when I was speeding or something like that. like things that people take very seriously. It's like an 8 or a 9, like they're like 2s. Everything simmered at a 2. And it felt like I had a coloring book with no lines. Like I came back and it was just like, none of this is real. Over there, that was real. This is Mickey Mouse stuff. Like, what is this? And then trying to come back, finding that home, finding meaning, finding your normal again. Right? That's the readjustment piece. That's it right there. And that's long and origin. I'm still working on it. I'll let you know how it goes. But it's been 12 years. So.
Well, is that why a guy like John Basilone or something like would continually crave out going back to the battlefield, like even after he got the Medal of Honor
Absolutely.
and all that stuff.
100%. Yeah, absolutely.
Like, did he wanted? I don't even say he wanted to die, because I don't think he wanted to die, but he craved the experience of that, like the visceral adrenaline. And they hadn't done bungee jumping at that point, so I guess he didn't have that to fall back on, so to speak.
Hang gliding wasn't in
I guess
in vogue yet.
Nope.
So like you definitely, because if you're away from that, it's almost like the silence is deafening, right? And then you have to stop being that person. Well, every iota of your being has been shaped to be that person, and now you're no longer there fulfilling the purpose with which you were filled. And then now you have to figure stuff out. And that, I think, is like the crux of the problem for a lot of these guys, myself included, right?
So do you think a lot of that has to do, is it because of the adrenaline and like you're making, the point, like obviously you get pulled over or something. It's like, well, there's a huge difference between being in a firefight with the Taliban and, a police officer saying, hey, you're doing 73 back there in a 55. Like, what the hell?
You're in trouble. Yeah.
But I mean, from that perspective too, is it also because in the military, things are so regimented, you have a schedule, because like there's such a structure to, well, maybe there's a structure to things. So, like, I guess when you're over combat, not necessarily, but, do you think that has something to do with that? Or is it just really just the reintegration? And, I can't speak from experience, so.
The excellent points. Like I can really only speak to my personal experience. I operated as a cab scout, so a cavalry scout.
Sure.
So we did RISTA type stuff, which is reconnaissance, surveillance, and target acquisition and everything. So we did a lot of, we were given a lot of latitude, right?
Sure.
So a lot of guys, especially in like line platoons, infantry companies and stuff like that are very regimented with what they do. Like, you will do this thing in front of you until I tell you to stop, and it's very high discipline, everything too. We had elements of that for sure. I don't want to say we're out like cowboys or anything, but like we were given a lot more latitude with stuff. We're like, hey, this is generally what we need you to do. Here's the mission. We need it done by X. Here's your left and right boundaries. Do not cross them. And I'll check in tomorrow. Don't disappoint me. It was kind of like our rhythm for stuff,
So you had is it fair to say if life is like a coloring book with no lines, that's like a black and white book with only lines, basically, and no color.
And you're filled with purpose, right? Like, because everything you're doing, everything everyone around you is doing is pulling in this one direction, right? And then you come back to, well, if I go to work today, I'll get to do those reports, or I could just stay in bed and then maybe I'll get a phone call and like, where are you? And then there's really no consequence, like comparatively, right? And you have to,
it's interesting.
You have to find within everything feeling like a 2 or 3, you have to find that 10-point scale.
Yeah.
You have to readjust back to that. That to me kind of summarizes reintegration, coming back.
Yeah. Those TPS reports,
Yeah.
He just didn't get them done on time.
They didn't fill.
You didn't get the memo.
Yeah.
Well, it's so funny because, I mean, you see, when you're a kid and you get taught about religion, let's say your cup is like a thimbleful, so it's easy to fill it up with the philosophy of religion, the dogma of everything else. And then you believe it because you're told to and things like that. You get older and now you have to come to grips with what do you believe, because your cup is now bigger, right? And it's not filled up anymore with the basic tenets of whatever it was that they poured into you. It sounds like in the military, they pour your purpose into you at the beginning.
Whatever size cup you got, they're going to fill it.
They're going to fill it with a fire hose, right? Yeah. And then you come back out and you're like, well, whatever they're trying to fill me up with at the company at, Intertrode or whatever, Editech, whatever place you're going to, where the TPS reports flow like water, that, yeah. You just end up listening to a lot of Brian. What was it, Brian?
What?
The dude. He celebrates his entire catalog. Anyway, he was a musician back in the 80s.
Oh, you mean
not Brian Adams. I'm thinking Brian Adams for not Brian Adams. Anyway, I think. So, what is your? they gave you a style of leadership in the Army. They said captains do this, right? Whatever captains do, especially if you're a Ranger captain, then maybe you do something more captain-y than other captains.
Quick clarification point real quick, because I'm sure there's going to be somebody in the comments sections. I am, before anyone looks me up, I am Ranger qualified, meaning that I graduated from Ranger school. I was a paratrooper in the United States Army. To be a Ranger, technically, right, to say I was a Ranger and everything, you have to be in Ranger Regiment.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
Which is 75th Ranger Regiment. They have a few battalions. I was never there, so angry at me. I had the little tab on my thing.
Well, but I mean, you're no less qualified than anybody. You passed the qualifications. You just weren't in the regiment per se. Didn't do those things.
Right.
Per se.
So it's not to be a pedant, right? But like there is a distinction there, and I don't
understand.
want to take away from those guys or add to myself, right? So,
right. Absolutely. In your practices, in your leadership, either in the Army or out.
Right.
So now you work for a company or in the corporate world.
A major company.
A major company. And you exhibit leadership there as well.
Supposedly, yes.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
Do you incorporate any esoteric or unconventional type of practices into your leadership style or the way that you choose to interact with folks?
I don't believe so. The literal definition of esoteric is like what for the inside, for the inner circle.
Sure.
Is effectively what it means. So I guess in that loose definition, I kind of do, right? Because I'm taking these things that were for a very small percentage of us, right? Like Army officers and everything too. And I'm translating that to, how do I reach these corporate people to, when they get up there and they talk about leadership, what they're really actually talking about is management, right? They're talking about management. A lot of them wouldn't know leadership if it bit them in the face. But it's a different thing, and I'm using these outside techniques. And to your point earlier, the Army doesn't necessarily, and I would assume for the other branches too, they don't necessarily be like, this is our leadership. Here's your leadership pill. You're going to take it. They give you a lot of the tools to put in your tool bag, and like your overall like tool belt, tool bag, toolbox, whatever you want. That vessel, right? That is your leadership, right? And it's only as good as what's in there and how well you apply it. They taught us stuff from leading by example, which is not always appropriate, right? You don't always need to do that. Administrative leadership, right? Like how can you sit back and be like a Dwight Eisenhower kind of character and like really task appropriate like all the different pieces and get it together. Coercion is one. Intimidation is another tool.
Just put that down anyway.
Yeah, whatever.
These are all things that we use, and they're not all appropriate all the time for the right person, the right situation, right?
Sure.
So it's all, how are you going to use it? So I've got a lot in there that it does not show up, and you don't go and get your MBA and they teach you this stuff.
No,
right?
sure.
So it's some fits, some doesn't, right? Like we used to always say there's 3 ways to learn things, right? There's repetition. 1, there's repetition. 2, there's blunt force trauma. And then 3, there's a combination of 1 and 2. Right?
Sure.
That philosophy doesn't apply to camera to do that in corporate. So,
well, what would you say? You were talking about leadership versus management.
Yeah.
So what would you say is the most effective ways of leading versus management style then? Because I think in the corporate world, there's a lot of managers that aren't necessarily great leaders.
Right. Well, because they've never seen it, right? Like, so leadership is, and it's through no fault of their own, right? Everybody gets up every day. They want to do the best job that they can. Right?
Sure.
Like more often than not. But they don't know. And like, we have a habit too of like reaching for the top word, the best word, I'm a good manager. No, I'm a leader. I'm a pathfinder with this or what, like.
That would servant leader.
Yeah.
Like everyone's humble bragging.
Altruism.
Yes. Vanguard of whatever. You're not. Like, because we can't all be superlative. That's just not how that works, right? Like, but I think we need to define what are we talking about between leadership and management, right? Because that even gets lost too, right? And I think that the easiest way to really kind of differentiate the two, management is about retention. It's about keeping efficiency and everything. So 2 + 2 is going to equal 4 or as close to 4 as we can keep it without any spoilage or loss or inefficiency. We're going to, if you can get it 3.99999, you're a great manager doing a good job. You're keeping your eye on the ball. You're making sure your underlings are doing what they're supposed to do, et cetera, et cetera. Leadership, and why leadership is more valuable, is a type of alchemy. In so much as you get more out of its constituent parts. You make 2 + 2 = 5 or 6 or 7, right? That's what leadership actually is, right? And that is hard to do, right? It's getting people in the right positions inside your organization who have that toolbox with a lot of tools, right? Who know how to apply each one to each person, each situation accordingly. It is difficult to actually have throughout an organization.
100%.
Yeah.
It's interesting you bring that up. And I want to talk more about historical stuff because you and I we're talking Nazis on the way down.
Oh, God.
Oh boy. We're going off the rails today, folks.
I'm getting demonetized.
Well, you have an incredible command of World War II history, World War I history,
Appreciate it.
and other wars as well. And you and I talk about me being Romanian. I'm always fascinated by Eastern European history and talking about some of that with you and even talking about popes and other stuff on the way down. But I remember during the Nuremberg trials, so there's Rudolf Hess and then there's Hoss, right? Hoess, which was the commandant of Auschwitz.
Right.
This guy fascinated me because of his testimony, and it goes right to management versus leadership. Thoughts. He was there and he wanted to say, as he was being asked questions about what happened at Auschwitz and everything, he said, I want to make it very clear, we did not mistreat the Jews. We did not mistreat. We were there with a mission, and that mission was to exterminate. That's what I was tasked to do, but we did not mistreat them. And that was important to him psychologically on that issue because as you could say a manager par excellence in that respect, he knew what his parameters were, and he said, we did not go outside those parameters. It didn't matter to him what the parameters were, how crazy or insane or monstrous, right? But he kept to what he was asked to do, and he did it to the best of his ability, which is the craziness of bureaucracy in certain respects, obviously. But
yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about that as an idea of management gone awry?
Really teeing me up for something great here. No, it just like it goes to show you the lengths of like mental gymnastics people will go through to justify what they're doing, right? And also would point out too that like, is anyone speeding at the Indy 500 if everyone is speeding, right? So this guy's looking around and he's, when everyone has lost their mind effectively, like he's the most sane person there, and he had to carry that distinction with him too. It's just truly awful that like somebody can get to that point and justify it in front of a tribunal.
Oh, yeah.
It's not like in a casual conversation. Yeah. He was standing in front of the gallows, effectively, like saying this and everything too. It's just shows you the level of indoctrination and everything that these people, went through. And classic line too. But like the first country the Nazis invaded was their own.
Yeah,
sure.
And they did so not just on a physical level, but an intellectual, political level too. That kind of thought process could be propagated, right? Like that's truly monstrous. But yeah, that's somebody who, this is my task. I'm going to do it, and then did not look beyond that whatsoever, right? And then you get enough of those people like that, and terrible things can happen, right?
Yeah. I'm going to go down a weird path here. If I haven't already.
It's not enough.
So the question becomes, after the war is over, Operation Paperclip kicks in.
Yep.
And for those that don't know about Operation Paperclip, that was the area where we took a lot of German scientists, military types, and others, and utilized their expertise to make America into what ultimately ended up being the superpower that it is.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, that's just what happened. That's the truth. But my question becomes, how much of, let's say, leadership styles of the Wehrmacht seeped into army leadership? Like, did we change as a military force after that with influences? Because you have, obviously, the Frankfurt School of Philosophy, which came up with the idea of critical theories of all kinds, including quote-unquote critical race theory that came upon later, which spurred its own sort of, quasi-revolution in America in recent times. That seeped into our philosophy. So why wouldn't Wehrmacht tactics and leadership principles seep into our American military philosophy, right?
So, in the military and the army, especially for officers, we did our level best, and we were told to be apolitical with everything. We weren't allowed to have political opinions, social media, and everything. I'm sure it's changed since I've been out, but while I was in, we were pretty much like a political non-entity. Whatever your idea was or what you thought, but you kept it to yourself, right? You just were not allowed to talk about any of this stuff. But when I was in, there's also, so a lot of people don't understand that political component to it or apolitical component, but there's also an academic component to being an officer. We would write papers and everything. We would discuss and journals and stuff like that. And originally I was trained as an armor officer, right? So we had to learn about armored warfare in theory, right? And I've had to read Panzerleader. I've had to read Heinz Guderian. I've read memoirs from Rommel and stuff like that, all these guys. So a lot of how the U.S. Army actually fights, especially with armored warfare doctrine and everything too, is lifted straight off of what the Germans did in World War II. A lot of their, what better example when in a lot of battles they're outnumbered 3, 5, 10 to 1 and win. Yeah. Right. Like how? Right. Like we want to learn how. Right. Like good ideas. You can separate them from. Separate art from the artist, so to speak, right? So we would absolutely take those playbooks too. Like, our a case in point, right? So if you were to take the M60, a general purpose machine gun that we had for years and years, right? Popular throughout Vietnam. It was being phased out in the early 2000s whenever I was in. And you were taking MG42, was captured, say, outside of Berlin, right? Open up the breech, it's identical. Same thing. Cool. We just slowed down the rate of fire, because it shoot through ammo.
Yeah, and you had to change the barrel constantly, right? So
yeah. So, we're not adverse to taking good ideas, right? Be it from anybody. Right?
A good idea is a good idea.
Yeah, and they absolutely had some fantastic revolutionary theories and tactics they applied on the battlefield to great effect too. And by the end of the war, we actually start to see a lot of the Western allies too using blitzkrieg tactics, like most famously Patton and Omar Bradley too, on the American side. And then in the East, you have like Zhukov, right? Those guys, and some of the other their field marshals too that are using effectively, very similar tactics too, with the goal to encircle and cut off entire swaths of the German front line, right? Although Soviets are a little different with deep battle, right? But it's one of my personal favorites. I don't know how much time we have to.
Well, we have time.
What's deep battle?
So deep battle, right? So the difference in doctrine. So blitzkrieg, right? Like war, I'm sure everybody knows, right? Blitzkrieg deals with penetrating at what's called a heavy point or Schwerpunkt within the enemy's line, pouring through there and encircling the front line, and then cutting them off from reinforcement, right? And utterly destroying them, or pushing on further towards strategic areas, right? Deep battle does that, but everywhere. It does it everywhere along the front line. It actually has like a frontline attack that will create essentially small pores, micro pores within the enemy front line. And from those like small breakthroughs, then the mobile reserve will breach through. So whereas you're trying to go through with like a needle through the front line with a blitzkrieg, right? The deep battle pours acid on it and just dissolves the whole thing to where they just, the Soviet idea is that they just ignore your front line altogether and just attack straight through to the rear and destroy all your logistics and rear echelon and everything. This is what everyone was terrified of for a land battle in Western Europe during the Cold War years, right? They did not want to engage with the Red Army's deep battle tactics with their waves of tanks and shock troopers.
So that's a great point. And my favorite episode of James Bond, Octopussy, gets exactly at this point. General Orlov, played by Stephen Burkett, comes up with the idea of basically pushing on into Europe with all of the Soviet forces. Now, we had 7 Corps that was there, our famous tank.
Army 7 Corps.
Yeah, Army 7 Corps. The huge tank divisions that were supposed to hold back. How long do you think we would have made it against the Russians if they actually had intended to do what General Orlov wanted to do?
Not long at all.
So we were anywhere near ready for that.
I actually got to see a lot of the silos that the Soviets had when I was there in the Czech Republic and everything too. They were right there. There was quite a few of them too. So obviously they wouldn't go straight to a nuclear response immediately, right? But their whole thing was to just advance as quickly as possible and push past all of that too. And a lot of our doctrine was defensive, like delay tactics, elastic defense and stuff like that too, just to buy time, right? So I really think weeks at most. Yeah. Now bear in mind though, I was just a captain. I wasn't, didn't have the big hat with all the stars on it,
Oh, the scrambled eggs and all that.
You didn't have your inflatable army in Africa?
Yeah. Not so much.
But that's pretty crazy stuff. What drove you to write the book?
Really just, it was living rent free in my head. So as a type of therapy too, right? So, I originally went to college for, I have a psychology degree, right? So, I really, unlike a lot of my peers, I didn't really have as much of a stigma about getting help or talk therapy right afterward too. So I sought that out. And my therapist at the time actually recommended that I write some of it down. And as a very amateurish writer, I was like, oh, this is actually turning into a book. I might as well just write down everything that happened into some kind of informative and entertaining format. And that's kind of the genesis of the book. Yeah.
So do you still, after you wrote the book, do you still journal as a method of coping or, whatever you want to call it, like your own, accepting the world as it is?
Less and less though, it is just trite and flippant as it's going to sound. So gratitude journals actually do help quite a bit.
Really?
They actually do. I make a daily habit of it.
Okay.
Keeping just minor, small things, right? Just acknowledging that like this is a good thing and it happened and I'm happy for it and everything too helps keep you grounded and more present too, as silly as that sounds. I know, like a cliche here.
No,
I wouldn't say it's silly or cliche. I think more individuals need to practice gratitude in this world. And I think from a spiritual and a journey perspective, even if you haven't served in the military or gone through these traumatic situations, I think journaling and that type of realm can really help people. Because I think it's also put something tangible on paper so you could go back and say, hey, a year ago, this is what I was struggling with. And you could use that as a marker and measurement, right? It's certainly something that could help. And
it's a good time to slow down too. And it's nice. You can control that time and space too, which is good too. Because a lot of things just come at us and we're reacting a lot throughout the day. So it's good to take that, and it's also a nice little self-inventory piece.
Right.
You can really, and it's a small thing that you can do, just a minute or two a day. I write it on a Post-it note. Like I just have a stack of Post-it notes next to my desk. So,
yeah, that certainly works though, right? It's effective.
Yeah. yeah, as far as any other, serious writing into my experiences with the military and everything, no, I haven't done any more of that. I feel that I got out what I needed to get out, because I honestly, before I had written it all down, I was reliving a lot of the stuff often. Like, it would replay. I would feel like I was back there. I was constantly thinking through what ifs and stuff.
Sure.
Like that. It was really, your past can really kind of take over your present if you're not careful.
So obviously don't want to elicit any negativity or anything else. Is there anything you'd like to, kind of put out there? Like, is there certain, stories you want to tell or whatever else? We're not asking you to go out of your comfort zone either. So by no means.
Oh, like a war story? You guys
Sure.
want to, okay. All right. I'll tell you.
I'm always partial to the zoomy one, but
I'll tell you a fun story. I'll tell you zoomy. So we, because we're the Army and we're intellectually challenged, we were not trusted to run some of our, higher end equipment. So we had like a tac sat, right? So this like satellite uplink equipment and everything too. And the Air Force is like, no. We'll send a guy who will run that, and that will be his thing and everything.
can't have your knuckle draggers, out there goofing it up.
Filling up on crayons and then trying to,
I thought that was mostly the Marines filling up on crayons.
Oh, I am partial to crayons myself. But they send this guy out here and he just 100% just Air Force base kid, never left, just 1,000%, like straight out of high school. I'm going to join the Air Force.
Sure.
Coke bottle glasses and everything too. And we're just like, what's your name? He's like, Airman, like, your name's Zoomy, and he's like, that's not my name. I'm like, well, aircrafts go Zoom, and you're the only Air Force person here. So welcome aboard, Zoomy. And we ruined that kid. We absolutely by the end of it, right? Like, and the Air Force has a reputation compared to the Army and everything of being, and the Marines, a clean cut, like a little more highbrow and everything too. They're the ones you want to take home to mom, right?
Right.
So, by the end of it, we had him cursing, doing dip, every bad habit you could possibly think of. And we eventually put him on the wall and everything too. And we got him because so few people in the Air Force actually experience frontline combat and everything too. Their requirements to get a lot of their awards and stuff were a lot less stringent than ours. So we put him in several engagements too. We put him on the wall within reason, of course.
Sure.
We want to get him killed. So we actually had him return fire to the enemy and stuff like that too. So we'd like to think that when we got him out of there, when he rotated out, and he did get out safely for everyone listening, it was fine. When he got back to his base, that he was just the most badass, Air Force kid, on that base, all his combat stuff,
You look like Chesty Puller.
Yeah. I was like, you're going to be the Audie Murphy of whatever Air Force base you walked out of. That was our plan. So
excellent.
Yeah, we ruined him for life.
I love that story because you turn him into a man. In a certain sense, in the idea of if I could be non-politically correct for a second, and I usually am, in that sense. So there's a leadership style just to that. I mean, that guy had a journey, a massive journey as a human being, coming from a very stringent, very, very sheltered existence.
Yeah, we're this kid's cloistered. Yeah.
To now he's just this maniac, but not really.
Soon be the maniac.
Well, he's able to marry those two parts of himself, hopefully, somewhat seamlessly.
Yeah.
But there's a leadership track to that. Who came up with that as an idea, first of all, and how was that implemented in the sense that, because you must have had a thought about how you were going to approach this, right?
Well, like any great idea, it just kind of happens organically, right? The nature kind of pulled itself that way. I think it was me and a couple of the NCOs that were there with me, and then headquarters were just like, wouldn't it be great if, I'm not even sure which one of us came up with the idea, but we immediately dogpiled on it. And we're like, oh, we're loading up that minecart and pushing it down the rails. Absolutely. Like, that was the gestation of that.
Okay.
Nice.
Now there's a Zoomy 2, isn't there? That
Part 2, Electric Boogaloo. Yep.
that's right. So same deal with him, or
We didn't get a chance to, because he was off cycle from us. And at the time, I think they were doing 6-month or 3-month deployments or something like that. I forget. But, we're there for a year. So we actually had another one come in. And we were really under a lot of heavy attack from the Taliban. So this was during the elections that we would run in the fall. So we do, trying to restore democracy, right? So we do the elections every single fall in Afghanistan, and the Taliban, of course, would have to respond in kind. So they would hit all the bases, they would hit all the outposts and everything too, and then they would try to, attack the election sites. We'd have to move the election sites. So it was this big cat and mouse game, right? So he came in during one of our really heavy cycles, right? So we were getting bombarded the entire time. So he actually, he got injured and had to get medevaced. He actually, that one, he actually panicked. I had to go get him out from under a structure. Right. So you have hardened bunkers and everything too, that they're actually designed to withstand mortar and rocket attack and stuff. Sure. Too. And he was under not like a trailer type structure too. So I had to go get him too. And he was kicking and screaming at me. It's fun times.
I guess they didn't teach that in the Air Force. It's just no, that's a mobile trailer. Don't want to be there.
And before I fall into the trope of, Army guy bashes on Air Force or whatever, I've seen Army guys panic.
Oh, sure.
I've seen everybody, and even guys who've been in it, been in combat a few times. You never know how you're going to react every single time.
Right.
To some days it just you're less likely to. Right. I've had moments where I've frozen.
Yeah.
It happens. And that was my job. Right.
Sure.
It was more likely to happen at the start, but so it happens to the best of us too. So no hard feelings, Air Force.
No, absolutely not. We're not ragging on any of the branches of the military here.
You told a different story of an officer that got compliance at the barrel of a gun. I don't know if you remember that story. You told it when he came over to the lodge. I don't remember the particulars. I was hoping you would, but basically where he was asked to do something, or he was tasking somebody to do something, and that person, whether he was a reservist or something else, didn't want to do what they were asked to do, and there was some pushing the guy had to get done in order for that to happen.
Yeah, that's one I probably don't want to get into.
Okay, fair enough.
In a recorded format, but
things happen out there, obviously, that yeah. But if you have any others you want to share, we'd be happy to listen.
We had I'll tell you another. We'll end it on a high note here with story time. We had so a lot of people don't know this, but Afghanistan and I think Iraq too. So both of them together were heavily contracted wars, heavily contracted conflicts, right? We hired a lot of third-party people to do stuff, to include transport too. Mm-hmm. So there were Russian pilots that we had too, that would have old hips and stuff like that would fly in and do transport stuff and everything too. We had local Afghans that we would employ too. There were a lot of contractors. We even had some defense contractors come in and be like, "Here's our new whiz bang thing. We're going to install on your vehicles or whatever." And I'm like, "No one talked to me. Fantastic. Okay. Don't know how you got here, but one of these pilots. I want to focus on one of these pilots here. One of these helicopter pilots. Our area was called Shark, Charkh, so Shark District, right, in Logar Province, right. So we're just below Kabul, right. So the whole area was a highway to get, arms and fighters into Kabul too. So we're a pretty busy area, and our place, because it was always under attack and always dealing with all this stuff, we called it the Shark Tank, right? And it developed a reputation pretty quickly. And we eventually got our air shut off, right? Like we eventually had to where like our helicopter landing zone was shut down. Like pilots were taking way too much ground fire. It was too hot, too dangerous, right? So fast forward a month or two, we've had like no air and everything too. One early morning and everything. Like helicopter and everything. I'm like, am I dreaming? Like, what is this? You know, and I go out there. It's one of these Russians in a hip, right? Who has just landed and his English is terrible, right? And he's helicopter's still going and everything. We're like, we can't. We're like, go go away. We're trying to like wave him off and everything too. And he's just like, well, like I'm just my terrible accent. But like he's trying to, you know, and he's like, I can't hear you. We're like, no. And he's like, I kill engine, like cuts the engine off. And it takes a few minutes to get a helicopter back up and everything too.
Yeah.
And we're like, this is Shark. He's like, oh, like he realized where he was too. And immediately the rockets, like, because it was dawn too. So then like the Taliban, of course, like heard all this too and then saw the helicopter.
Sure.
We start coming under attack and everything too. And I've never seen a helicopter take off that fast. So you look on his face and you realize where the hell he was.
Now, what's a hip exactly?
Chef's kiss. A hip is a Russian transport helicopter. The one in...
Is it like a Chinook?
No. It closer like a Black Hawk. It's the one in... which Rambo movie is it where he's fighting the Russians in Afghanistan? Is that 3? 2? It's 2?
It's 2.
They all run
with
together.
the explosive
the explosive arrowheads.
Yeah,
They're the ones that they put a bunch of props on to make it look like a hind. Right? Like
okay.
It's actually a hip.
Interesting.
Oh,
Yeah.
so it's a less... Okay.
It's like a utility helicopter. It's not a combat helicopter. Yeah.
Got it.
I mean, I could just picture this dude come out like smoking a cigarette with like, you know, the hair all screwed up. Like just like, Mother Russia.
It's like Peter Stormare. Again, he's up there in the what was that thing before the International Space Station?
Oh, the mirror.
The mirror. Yeah. And he's just like, he's twitching. He's been up there by himself the whole time talking to himself.
Oh, yeah. No, I don't know if he did or not, but in my memory, he's got like the Ushanka cap.
Yeah, he does. Yeah, he's got. Oh no, not as an astronaut, but you
know, my guy.
Oh yeah. He comes out there kalinkaing off the helicopter.
Terrible.
Sorry. You can make fun of Russians. You know, we're basically at war with them. So you know, it's
fair enough.
Are we though?
Well, not really. No. That'll be an interesting thing.
I don't think we are. I think the military-industrial complex is.
Well, they're trying to be.
Yeah.
If they could keep it from going nuclear, I'm sure they'd love it as an idea. But
well, hopefully our interdimensional beings will stop any nuclear stuff from happening.
Yeah, so that's an interesting thing to get into. That I'm sure. It's like we've been keeping this pretty normal. Let's just go batshit bonkers right off the flare.
These go to 11.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Clarice, I want to have a good time all the time. There's other ways of coping that exist that Nick and I have explored some role-playing scenarios. And before you come to your own conclusions of what that means, it's mostly in the Dungeons and Dragons and Warhammer 40K.
I was going to say, are we talking about like chains and whips? Or like, where are we going with this, Alex?
It's your world, Dave, not mine. But what I'm fascinated and would love to get into on a certain level is how that could help with mental health, with the idea of reintegration, with the idea of a path forward. So Nick is one of the better that I've seen painters of Warhammer 40K figures.
And thanks you.
He and I play extended campaigns in 40K and tabletop stuff and hey, no shame in that game, boy.
You're airing out all my nerd stuff. Great.
Well, it's I'm airing out my nerd stuff. If you got to go along on this journey with me, you're welcome.
Yep.
As Weird Al once said, we're white and nerdy.
That's right.
The Great Warrior Poet.
Weird Al Yankovic. Yes, there was Snorri the Elder and Weird Al Yankovic.
Yep.
So what How has that been for you, like personal journey wise? Has that helped?
It's kind of crazy, right? Like as you were talking about that, like so for the normies out there, the so Warhammer is Games Workshop is a British company that does tabletop wargaming with miniatures and everything. They've been doing it for 35 years, I think.
Yeah, it's 40 years. Yeah.
But the idea of like miniature wargaming on tabletop has been around for hundreds of years.
Absolutely.
Really became popularized post World War II. There was a few British commanders that kind of brought it back. But when I played it as a kid, thought it was cool. I was like, wow, a little spaceman that can fight. How neat. Go put all that on hold. Go do my army training and everything too. And during my army training, we had huge tables, huge terrain boards that actually had miniature tanks and everything too. And we would have to go through and do like a fold a gap, the Reds are coming, like type scenario, and give orders and stuff like that too. And they would assess us, the instructors, on how well we read the terrain. Did you call in for air support fast enough? Did you move your reserves, et cetera, et cetera? And I was just like, wow, this is a affirmation that everything I've done to this point has been right. Yeah. No, it was kind of cool to see that, like, it actually came from somewhere too, that actually had like a professional origin, right? That it isn't entirely leisure unto itself, right? But that has been kind of an outlet this whole time too, for everybody's like inner armchair general, right? You can sit and do these things and play and everything in a mental exercise that's bloodless, right? Unless you, I don't know, cut yourself while you're putting them together or whatever.
Pushing pencils under fire. Yeah. But you put an extraordinary amount of care and time into the scenarios that you come up with and stuff like that. And I got to think a lot of that was fostered through the understanding that you got in the military and the way that things behave, how they go. And we were talking about a book only recently that we both are avid readers, especially of fantasy sci-fi literature and stuff like that. And one of the things where it presents itself as some story on some planet, some things, but the amount of actual hard-nosed tactical combat strategy and everything, it all comes from real life. Like that, the whole, you said Tom Clancy, Red October, the ability for him to take his incredible knowledge of tactics and strategy and put it into a fictional story that's fun to listen to and listen. But you're getting, like, as you said, a master class in how do you withstand a siege, right? How do you perpetuate a siege onto an area? What do various tactics look like? So yeah, that's always fascinating stuff.
Well, always the best fantasy, the best fiction, right? Science fiction, whatever, is grounded in reality, right? So one of the reasons in Game of Thrones and George R. I'm not going to say his two R's. George R. R. Martin's his Song of Ice and Fire series is so successful is because it's the War of the Roses, right? When you have a historical basis for something, right? You have guardrails, you have lines to paint with it, right? Too, so it sells the world. All that more, right? And it gives you something to shoot for and work with, right? So I think that's important, right? Because it's easy just to run off to Narnia, and just write something absolutely crazy. But like even Tolkien's writing, right? Like he dealt a lot with his processing of the Great War to use a World War I veteran, right? So he's dealing
not all the Psalm, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Right. So he had a lot of feelings and a lot of ideas about right and wrong, good and evil, right? Like, he's a little black and white for today's standards, but like he, certainly took away a lot of that. And it all shapes itself, right?
Tolkien once chastised what's his good friend from who wrote Narnia.
Lewis.
Yes, Lewis.
Yeah.
That he was too overt in his Christian style. I mean, you could say that Tolkien was just as dedicated to writing a Christian, Christ-based narrative just not as overt as C.S. Lewis was. But C.S. Lewis, of course, as a convert from atheism, really wrote about that. And are there any atheists in foxholes?
Are there any atheists in foxholes? There are fewer of them. I think combat tends to push people towards God.
Yeah.
A lot of times, even myself, they're like, hey, who needs to take mass, during like really tough training, but I'll be Catholic for 20 minutes. She'll take a break. But it definitely puts things into perspective, right? Like not many 18, 22-year-olds get your mortality like right in front of your face. Like, hey, you're going to die. Like eventually, maybe not now, could be now, but you're going to die. Like that's something you have to wrestle with.
Yeah.
Jeez. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a pretty heavy thing to wrestle with, obviously.
Yeah.
Because most 18 to 22-year-olds are out and think they're invincible. But
so yeah, one of the things about being a soldier and being in combat and like how you're okay with it, right? And how you don't just like go crazy every single time is it's going to sound a little nuts. Like you have to be okay with the idea of dying, like, because otherwise you're going to try to preserve yourself every single time, right? You're not going to do your job, right? You're not going to return fire.
yeah.
Move when you need to move, right? Like you're not going to do the things you need to do to be ultimately successful, right?
Sure.
So it's tough. Like you have to, almost train the humanity out of yourself, like in a way.
Yeah, because I would imagine self-preservation in a lot of those scenarios would actually be detrimental.
Mm-hmm.
To your point, if you're behind cover, but you need to move to a foxhole or somewhere that has more reinforcements or whatever else, right? It's...
Oh, absolutely. I could imagine being a horrible soldier unless I was indoctrinated. Probably, I'd constantly be trying to save myself, scrounging whatever I could. As a
two uniforms on.
That's
top,
right.
Like staying more.
Yeah, even when I role played the Dungeons and Dragons scenario, they're like, Alex, why do you have like 7 spears and 4 swords and 2 backpacks? Like you suffer encumbrances like every roll.
I need them.
And I must have it all.
These are my things.
Well, they're precious to me.
Yeah.
It's precious. Anyway,
God.
so yeah, I mean it's crazy. You have to be indoctrinated to be annealed, so to speak, to be forged into a weapon and to be forged into somebody who's competent to fight in, what somebody said something about war recently where insanity actually becomes material, where you can reach out and touch insanity. Like that's what war is on a certain level. Does that make sense?
To a certain degree, right? Because it's absurdity in practice, right? And we're going to take all of this men and material and just potentially destroy it all,
Bash it against each other
for objectives that will quickly change the moment they make contact with the enemy, right? So,
Sure.
Some nebulous ideas, right, that are just going to run into an opposing force, and we're going to find some kind of consensus, right? Like the end of it. What did Karl von Clausewitz say, right? Like war is diplomacy through other means. Right?
Yeah.
So it's trying to find some kind of common ground in between through the medium of violence, right? And if that isn't adjacent or some kind of definition of insanity, I'm not entirely sure what is.
Yeah, that's true.
So
I suppose that's true. One of the craziest ideas is back in the day when you used to be able to buy your billet as not your billet, but your commission as an officer.
Right.
And the worst cases of that was, in essence, the Battle of Sebastopol, the charge of the Light Brigade.
Oh.
And during the Russian-Turkish War, right? If I'm not mistaken, the Brits were part of that. And it was just people that didn't know what they were doing, sending people to die, other people to die for crazy tactics that didn't make any sort of sense.
yeah. So you don't really hear about it much anymore. But like one of the, we were talking about Dante Alighieri.
Yes, yes.
Right up here. Like, the Commedia, the Divine Comedy, right? Inferno, Purgatory, Paradiso. Like, one of the things that comes up a lot, is like one of the worst things you can do for Dante and like medieval like thinkers of his time, everything too, was the idea of like simony, the sin of simony, right? Which is selling church offices.
Oh,
Okay.
Right. So you don't really hear it much anymore, but like back then it was a really, really big deal, right? Because the papacy was a lot more politically charged. They were trying to control things in Italy and everything. And ultimately his conclusion and what happens is that when you sell offices, right, be it a cardinal, a priest, whatever, right, you effectively erode the institution, right? Because not only, like, well, who are you going to sell them to? People that you like, probably, right? And people are going to give you money. So you're putting in people who are not qualified, and you're putting in basically political favors for people who are supposed to be of God, of the cloth, who a lot of them are supposed to have vows of poverty, stuff like that too. We're doing the exact opposite. Military, it's the same thing, right? You have people who are effectively buying these commissions and everything too, who have no business like doing any of this stuff, right? I had to, I was thinking about this the other day. Like, I had to put up my hand at least 4 or 5 different times to get where I was in the Army. Like a press gang didn't show up at my house and like kick the door in or anything, right? Like, I had to go like, I want to join the Army. I'd be like, okay. Well, I want to be an officer. Put your arm up. Well, I want to be a paratrooper. Put your arm up for that. Well, I want to, go to Ranger School. Put your arm up for that, right? Like I chose my path, like very much so, right? Like it wasn't chosen for me, right? Like it wasn't put into this space because I was incompetent or anything too. Like it you can see why they ran into the trouble that they did when you have enough of that, right? When you have people who, through money or political motivation, wind up in positions of command, right? Which is terrifying.
yeah, it is terrifying.
Yeah.
So you're a history buff, sounds like, especially for World War II and such. I love World War II.
I read too much, and I just have a lot of opinions. That's all it is.
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, but the fact is, your opinions are actually based on what you've read and know, unlike a lot of people's opinions that are just based on scratching their butt in the morning.
Yeah.
So obviously, warfare has changed over time with technology, the evolution of what's happened. That I think we could clearly, some of the weapons we have today we didn't have during World War II or World War I. Where everybody's fighting in the trenches. From a psychological perspective, and even from your own perspective, why do you think like the World War II generation? I'm sure guys had PTSD. I'm sure they had a lot of their issues, but why wasn't that more mainstream or prevalent out in the open back then versus now? Because do you think it has to do with the fact, like, maybe did they feel it was more righteous that they were there, like, back then? Because clearly, I mean, let's be honest, other than 9/11, did anybody really want to go to Afghanistan or go to Iraq or wherever else to fight these wars?
Well, I had been trying to figure out a way to get over there for a free trip for a while, and then went.
Well, admittedly, he comes from Mississippi, folks.
Yeah.
Like, anyway to get out of there.
He just wanted to see the poppy fields.
Yes.
So, there's, so you had said something that kind of prompted me about, and we may have to edit here actually, because I kind of lost your question, everything with my silly little joke there.
No.
Oh, no big deal.
We're not going to edit any of this.
It's terrible. Your question was, can you rephrase it again? Because there was something in there I really liked that I wanted to.
Well, I was just saying, I would believe that the World War II generation had PTSD as well, but was it because it was more of a righteous effort in the sense that they were saving the Jews, they were saving Europe from, the atrocities of the Germans at the time? And I'm not saying the German people, like obviously it was Hitler and the individuals under him.
Like there was a calling, there was a crusader aspect to it.
Right. Versus like today where you were sent over to Afghanistan, some guys were in Iraq, and a lot of that maybe
corporate profit or whatever else,
So yeah, okay, I'll try to answer it in order, but like there's a lot of parts to that and it's very complex, but so yes, they did have PTSD in World War II. They called it battle fatigue. World War I, it was shell shock.
Okay.
Right? So there were guys that suffered from this stuff too. A couple of things that go into it. One, like mortality rates for battle were a lot higher. So the guys who were experiencing frontline combat in World War I, there was a higher chance that they didn't make it back.
Sure.
So there weren't as many people to experience it, right? Like percentage-wise. I mean, raw number, I'm sure there were a lot of them and everything, but we have a very high survival rate for people who get injured in the field now. Right? Like if they're actually, it's like 97, 98%, right? Like it's very, very high. Because we've gotten very good at medevac, CASEVAC, and stuff like that. Back then, they didn't have that. So there's that one piece of it. Two, the series of interconnected conflicts that we call World War II, right, has kind of suffered throughout history of us always retelling it, talking about it, and repackaging it as a just war. For the people in it and at the time, on both sides, the outcome was anything but certain, right? And the idea that this was a just war, nobody was ready for World War II. Even the Germans were not ready for World War II, at least not in the way that it panned out. Right, exactly, right? Like, so Hitler, September 1st, 1939, him and his high command and everything too, they did not expect England to declare war on them when they crossed the border. They absolutely they gambled and lost there. Hitler famously apparently turned around that day, and was like, what do we do now? To like his advisors and everything too, because he had not planned for this, right? So World War II unfolded in a way that just nobody was expecting. Like, so, and then from there, it has kind of, through the generations, turned into a just war. So then if it is a just war, then we won, then we are just, and the people who fought it were just, so they can't have any misgivings about it, right? So I think the personal story for a lot of the soldiers, the PTSD, the things that they went through, kind of gets lost in that a little bit. This idea of like the noble war, which it was absolutely not. Like, war is brutal and terrible. In World War II especially, this is one of the few wars, like World War II really diverges to, and it becomes a total war, a war that we are going to fight for the unconditional surrender of two major powers. Yeah. Right? We're going to absolutely force them into the ground. Prior to that, and even after that, the majority of wars fought throughout human history have fought for usually territorial disputes. Yeah. They're usually fought through some limited economic gain or some kind of diplomatic thing we're trying to do. They're not to extinguish another state. Like World War II stands alone, kind of there. Even right now, the stuff that we're having right now is effectively territorial stuff, right? Like this belongs to me. We're supposed to have it. I'm going to take it. You don't belong here, right? From whichever side, whatever stance you want to take, right? That's effectively like, no one is trying to completely extinguish a state, right?
Yeah, because
Roman Carthage, I guess, would be another where there's natural extinguishing of state, so to speak.
And then you can make a, a lot of people know Carthage was a colony, the most successful colony of Tyre, right? But it wasn't the entirety of the Phoenician culture, right? Like World War II is really stands on its own. Like as its own thing with how wars are prosecuted. So,
yeah, and to your point, I think a lot of individuals forget that supposedly we didn't know about the concentration camps until later.
Right. Well, especially Allied troops and everything too.
Right.
This is something that has been mulled over by people who are much more well-read and educated than I am too, who specialize in this subject too. Like, who knew when on the Allied side there were Poland for quite some time. Their government in exile and some of their officers and agents and everything were really trying to raise the alarm on this for a while, earlier in the war. So, I mean, I think it was such a monstrous act that it defied belief until you were standing right in front of it.
Yeah.
So I think that's another thing too.
Well, and then I think what's not really talked about either was, and I love Japan, but the atrocities in China that they committed as well.
Of course. No, I mean, look, it history, of course, is written by the victor. And I'm not saying that like, we need to talk about the good things that Japan did or like I'm not taking it there, but I'm saying that the focus tends to be on the Western front.
Right.
How many times have we told the story of D-Day and everything too? And this is really a global conflict.
Right.
The bulk of World War II, I think it's something like 70-80% of the men and material expenditure was on the Eastern front.
Yeah, exactly.
It's effective.
This should be the German-Russian War.
It's
Really,
effectively
that's what it
the
was.
German-Russian war with other things happening.
Yeah, America had like a little, and we're wagging the dog here.
Right, exactly.
But, it's Mussolini killed. We don't even know how many people in Africa.
Yeah.
Right. Like throughout the colonies and everything there. Like the interwar years in Russia for the purges for Stalin. We're not entirely sure there too. Right. Like engineered famines and stuff like that too. There was
In Ukraine under Stalin, right?
There were allegations of engineered famine in India under the British too, right? There was a lot of things that happened too, and we do ourselves a disservice when we keep telling the story of like D-Day and then crossing the Rhine, and just over and over and over again.
Yeah.
So much other stuff that happened too, and we're still feeling the effects of all of it, right? That's the most significant thing that has happened in the past several hundred years, right? And we're still feeling the ripples in the pond after that.
Yeah. So let's go a little off the rails here.
Oh yeah, because we've been totally tame so far. Absolutely.
I thought I was already off the rail.
On this crazy train. Go ahead.
So Hitler,
Oh boy,
did he go to South America?
did he get it? Oh no, I highly, highly doubt that. I mean, the way in which Berlin was surrounded by the Red Army and everything, and just the level of just man and material they threw at that, like it's slim to nil,
The Red Army, come on. Bunch of peasants in the T-72s or what you call those?
34s.
34.
Whatever.
Because there's that, I saw it recently somewhere on the interwebs, of course. It was showing that when they did the DNA analysis and the jaw and everything, they said it was actually a woman's body, not Hitler's body.
The one in the bunker? Well, it might have been Eva Braun's body, but I just remember it's so funny, and I'm probably going to get flack for this, but I'm a massive player of Red Alert, the Command and Conquer, and they have the Russian troops as per usual. They have they take some shots at the Russians in terms of
Extra crispy.
goofing off, say the Tesla troopers and such. But they have one guy who's like, it's just the entire massive invasion gets destroyed. They're invading like these Japanese gardens, and there's one guy and a bear. and you and your bear have to go and take over the entirety of the thing and call in the extra Russian troops and so on. And the bear every once in a while goes, "Rawr," and the Russian trooper goes, "You are very moody for bear." And I was like, this is exactly what it must have been like in Berlin. I mean, exactly.
Oh my God.
So yeah, I dare say Hitler did leave. He was clearly in South America. There's no question.
No, yeah.
And Martin Bormann too.
I think they're all holding hands. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe.
You are very moody for America.
I always played as the Russians because the Tesla coils were the best in Command and Conquer.
Absolutely. Yeah. the guy with the he had what did he have? He had like this noxious gas, like some kind of a horrible like the nuclear slag, and he had like one of those things where you basically have a de-pest your plants with it. And he's like,
Yeah, it's a little spray.
silent spring, and it's just horrible puns and wonderful things. So yeah, we're going right off the rails here.
Oh yeah.
But well, I mean, I think you can't debate the fact that Eichmann made it to South America. There's you could clearly say, well, I think you can clearly say Mengele made it.
Oh, really? Mengele was actually caught in
Brazil, I thought, wasn't it? By his own granddaughter.
He was. Like that. I thought, if I remember correctly, I'm sure someone will actually absolutely know this, but like there was an animal that was injured. There was an animal that was injured in some kind of farming accident or something. He basically performed roadside surgery on the thing, and they're like, that guy has that. Who is this? And that, put the mark on his back and everything. So, very possibly. And so, I mean, there's areas of Brazil and Argentina.
Oh, it's mostly Argentina. Yeah, absolutely.
And I mean, so, is it so far-fetched to imagine, like they say that...
and especially when you look at when we brought over von Braun and all the scientists, to the U.S., like obviously, why were they all granted this clemency and we gave them the ability to run NASA and such?
So what I was saying earlier about like, we do ourselves a disservice when we keep telling the story about the Western Front. The Western Front. We talk about Germany, talk about Germany. Fully, like in the 1930s, right? Fully, like almost a third of the world, it flipped to fascist ideology, right? Like, where are the stories about Franco's Spain, right? Who continues to go with this well into the 1970s, right? Like other places too, like Germany was not the only place touched by this really dangerous ideology.
Absolutely,
and we're seeing like second and third wave like fascist, like post-colonial fascism. We're seeing like modern day stuff too. There's a fantastic professor at NYU. Her name is Ruth Ben-Giat, right? She specializes on studies in fascism too, particularly Italian fascism under Mussolini and everything. But she goes all the way up to present day stuff too, or more recent, like with Berlusconi and stuff like that too, like how he ran his media empire and everything too, and how the different waves of it work and how it's all interconnected. Like even Omar Gaddafi, right? Like with
Muammar Gaddafi.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Omar Gaddafi. Like his, his anti-colonial version of fascism too. Like the interconnectedness of it all too is really interesting.
Well, they even talk about that in Iraq, right? It's like under Saddam, at least things were stable. I'm not saying he was a good person. I'm not saying there was atrocities he committed, but the children knew they were going to school. Just don't talk about Saddam that day.
Yeah, these really authoritative, autocratic style governments, everything too. They always, not always, but like they tend to have like an early period of stability, right? Because everything is like getting consolidated.
Not only stability, but thriving. I mean, they tout Hitler in the first couple of years of, coming up with the Volkswagen and the Autobahn and all the things that were major pluses that they talked about there that made society better.
Yeah, so, and then we get to see the dark side of it later too, is the consolidation of power and the decision making under one person like quickly runs off the rails, So
would you argue at this point it seems like socialism / fascism seems to be making a comeback in ideology around the world?
So fascism, I would say autocracy. Yeah, fascism really has like a very, very narrow definition because it requires well, obviously like authoritative leanings and everything, right? But
like militaristic.
It requires it requires like Trump, right? Like President Trump with his or soon to be again former and soon to be president.
Once and future president.
Yeah, I get it.
Much like King Arthur. Yes, yeah absolutely.
He, they throw around, he's a fascist, and everything too, and it's like, well, he certainly has authoritative leanings for sure, but the actual book definition of fascism, does he control the media? No, he does not fully.
Clearly,
yeah. Does he have a paramilitary organization as beck and call? No, like we don't see anything like the SA or brown shirts or anything like that. We don't, we don't have like this Republican Guard or anything underneath them. No, but like, is he an autocrat? Absolutely. Like, is he? And autocracy, right? Like people that tends to crop up, from my reading and my thinking about the subject, tends to crop up when people are very unhappy. Tends to be fertile ground for it. And the more unhappy and the more desperate, the more it is fertile ground for reactionary politics. Oh, you're upset about X? We're more upset about X, and we're going to fix it. Oh, you're upset about Y? I'm even more upset about you should vote for me. These guys aren't doing anything about Y.
Sure.
And then that person can just...
And it's a lovely broad brush sort of thing that can get... So this is an interesting thing because I read Ian Kershaw's double book on Hitler, which I think is still probably holds up as probably the best biography on him. And it shows you that Hitler was, for quite some time, especially in his early days before the putsch and all of that stuff, a socialist.
Well, that's actually the party. Like,
they're the socialists.
So it's funny because a lot of the things that you see later on, and even in the recent years, was, well, no, socialism is the answer, and a lot of the things. And he said, well, Hitler was actually a leftist, not a rightist. Mussolini was a rightist.
Yeah.
In that sense, if you want to think about fascism as right side politics and socialism, or communism as left side. But then it was, initially you had people that had diametrically different ideas working together.
Yeah.
To a common purpose. That common purpose was not good, obviously, as world domination being what it was. But you had a very right wing in Mussolini and Franco, I would say, and a very left wing in Hitler and Stalin.
Yeah.
And we, for whatever level that's not painted accurately these days, I think they want to paint Hitler as very right wing and Stalin as very left wing, or the communist machine, so to speak, as very left wing. And it's just not what it was historically. But
you can have left wing and authoritative leanings. Like they're not mutually exclusive. Right? There seems to be this idea that it's on a continuum, really. But like I would take that continuum and bend it into a circle.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That would make way more sense. So they're actually very common here. So what's on the other side of the circle then?
Utopian democracy like style. Yeah.
Or it would be, middle of the road
representative
representative.
Rome's republic, as incorrectly remembered as that probably is. It's like this ideal way to run a government, because the Roman Republic had a lot of issues. That
couple.
Even Virgil, we were talking about Dante Alighieri and the whole idea of his Inferno,
his tour guide,
and his tour guide Virgil. But Virgil, in his own sense, had his own leanings at that time.
It was absolutely nationalist.
Virgil was a very MAGA guy, or Mara, maybe, make Rome great again. But that was interesting. And we've had those in many respects. People that sort of look back with this fondness on something and try to recreate it in a modern sense.
Right.
Bit of escapism there sometimes.
Yeah. And that's I brought her up before, but Professor Giat, she talks about
Well, I have to try to put that in the links. About
I highly recommend her lectures and her books and everything. But she talks about with the rightening, like reactionary politics, like the rightening, the rise of authoritarianism, and everything too. There's this idea of like a better before time, right? If we we need to just make things the way that they were, and things have changed now, and you don't like X, I don't like X, and that time is always misremembered too. And in my readings about, the Roman Revolution, as it's called by scholars, as like the Republic transitions into the Principate, right? Like as they become like imperial Rome and everything too. You have, Caesar Augustus, takes over. A lot of his stuff is like this return to like Roman values and everything too, that are so far back that no one alive remembers a lot of that stuff. And he's trying to return, but a lot of it is a reaction to, Antony and Cleopatra, right? Who he is still dealing with the residual, civil war right after Caesar's death, and Julius Caesar after his death. He's othering them. He's showing this as a foreign. They're Eastern. They're not true Romans like us and everything too. So how much of that is real? How much of that is politicking, right? And it feels very much like this return to the before time. We're the conservative true, and we need to push out the other. And I'm like, wow, if that tactic is very old.
It's very old, and it's very heavily repeated.
Yeah.
In many respects. Or, I mean, and I would say, and I think it was brought up by or shown by Mao very clearly in his revolution of like, well, forget about everything that happened before. We're going to whitewash it all.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a brand new thing that's because nothing else matters. And what you find is, so that's a callback to go back to your roots. This is a complete cutting of all roots. What you find is people go crazy when that happens, and they just kill everybody. Because once you're cut from your moorings of what defines you as a culture, as a society, as a this and that, you have nothing to call back to. So it's like, it's all fair game now. I mean, we're starting to whitewash, right? So what keeps it from being the purge then? Or because literally there were purges, right? So it's what the movie's based off of in a sense. Every time you try to create something completely new and people tend to disagree with you, well, what do you do with those people?
Oh, we just put them over there.
Yeah, in Deadland.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting.
No, very good point. Yeah.
Yeah. So how does this all relate back to men becoming better men?
Well, I feel like we've talked about a billion different topics on like what not to do.
Right. So any thoughts on what to do? Have you read or experienced or been taught any modalities that you like, that you've really gravitated towards, that said, hey, listen, this seems like a really good way of moving towards that path?
Not really that I've read anything on it, because there's a lot of noise in the space. There's a lot of noise in the space because a lot of people are trying to sell you something.
Sure.
Right. And there's a lot of guys I feel that are lacking in purpose. Maybe they feel a little bit rudderless with like what's going on, where they should take their lives, what they should do. A lot of traditional values have, they've broadened, they've changed and stuff too. There isn't like a stereotypical man, like what is an American man supposed to be like? Like you can't, what does that guy look like in a lineup? It's hard to describe. So I think the biggest thing, and I had to deal with this, I was laid off, divorced, and my father passed at roughly the same time. Right? Yeah, the trade, right? And, it was one of the worst things I think for a guy, right? Like in our society, is to not have a purpose. Right, to really just be adrift and everything too. And I think, leaving the military, like I felt that for a little bit. And then when that happened too, I really felt it. Didn't have a job, was out of the military, right? Father had passed, gone through a divorce, all that too, right? Like it's just, well, what's going on? What do I do? Focusing on a thing that you do, right? Whether it's, so you're a firefighter, be the best firefighter that you can be. Get into whatever stupid hobby, right? Like it doesn't matter what it is.
Like podcasting, for instance.
There you go, right? Like be the best.
Stupid hobby.
Be the best podcaster you can be. And this is
trying, man. We're trying.
This is going to sound, kind of trite, but like it all the other stuff will come. All the other stuff will come, right? When you have purpose, when you have a direction, right? Like our dreams ultimately are stupid. Right? They're just that. They're just dreams, right? But what's important is the direction and the drive, right? When you have direction and drive, there you go, right? It's you're going somewhere, you're doing a thing, and things will come along the way, right? Like, I think that's the most important piece, right? I didn't set out to do what I do now within the medical field and everything, but I'm on the path and I'm trying to do the absolute best that I can, right? And it gives me purpose every single day. I have 2 kids who are a challenge. I love them very much, but they're my daughter's 4.5 going on, 18, and everything I do is wrong, but giving her the best life, that's a purpose, that's a direction, and I think if men have that, right, like young men point themselves towards that, and the military is more than happy to give you purpose and direction.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So if you don't know what you're doing,
run that way. Don't mind the bullets.
go to your local recruiter and fill you with purpose. I think that's it. I think that's as simple as that is. I think that's the recipe.
Yeah, I feel like in today's society, a lot of people feel like they don't have a purpose. And I think that could be detrimental, clearly.
Oh, yeah.
Especially to your mental health. A person without any kind of purpose is just lost in the sauce, and they're out there in space, right? And yeah, from that perspective, as you alluded to earlier, I guess one of your modalities is just writing down on Post-it notes gratitude and positive thoughts, and clearly that's helping, just one of your coping mechanisms, but also something that puts out positive vibes into your daily routines and the universe, and bring positive change and energy into the mix.
Yeah. And a thing that, well said, a thing that I always have to remind myself of too, coming from the military, we almost have like a zero defect mentality, which is just ultimately not healthy for everyday life. But everyone gets up every day and tries their best. Even the person that cuts you off, even the person, your wife that yells at you when she's upset or whatever too, they didn't get up with that being their express purpose, right? So just understanding that everyone is generally trying their best, like even if they're being terrible in the moment,
That's a great way to think about it, because it really puts into perspective the fact that, nobody's out to mess your life up, per se.
Yeah.
And most people that are doing that, or let's say you get yelled at by your wife or your sister, your mother, whatever it is, or I'm not just demonizing women here, I'm just saying, or your father, or whoever it is, your boss. 99.99% of the reason he's yelling at you or she's yelling at you is because of what they have going on that day.
Yeah.
And you just, on what level, stepped on some trigger that is triggering them. Now we're coming upon a bugaboo of mine, because I'm very annoyed, and like Peter Griffin, what really grinds my gears?
I'm mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore.
Exactly. Is the lack. There's a dual thing that's happening, and I'm not trying to bright line this, because that's an easy thing to do, and I think it's wrong. There's an easy thing. There's a thing happening in society these days of two things. One is entitlement, and the other one is complete abrogation of personal responsibility.
Yeah.
And it's like one of these kinds of things of like, I'm triggered, and because I'm triggered, it's your problem to make me not triggered, whether it's definition of safe spaces and all this stuff. And again, I'm not being reactionary, because I think these things can be good, right? Safe spaces can be good as an idea, as a place of respite, as a place of resetting your mind, but you can't live there.
Right.
And you can't force others to adapt to your failings. It's not failings, but malfunctions. I don't know what to call it exactly, of abilities to not cope. And then, how does society sort of coddle you into this bubble wrap and put you out to pasture, rather than doing that? So that versus the Nicholas Talibi, the being anti-fragile, and the fact that we actually get stronger by having adversity. Can't be too much adversity, because then you break down, but just enough adversity, like in the military, I guess, to build you up into some other things. Thoughts?
Well, it's definitely interesting, right? Because like the idea of personal choice, freedom, self-agency, and everything, to defining your boundaries within society, this is all back to the French Revolution, right? Like we're all trying to figure out where we exist within, this society. Like, where do you end and I begin, and it does not fall within the state to define everything, right? So we have a lot of this is cultural. A lot of this is, very much in the moment, like right now, trying to figure it all out. At the end of the day, no, very few people care about, let alone like what you think and feel. Right? Not because they don't like you or they don't, like you're a bad person or anything like that. Like they're too wrapped up in their own stuff to even consider all that and everything too. So a lot of it I see is a projection of like self-determination and agency in a world where everything feels nebulous. Like they're trying to go like, I want to control this because this is that. This is me trying to find a boundary in an uncertain place. And we do live in an uncertain world, right? We're talking about drones earlier, like the drones over New Jersey and everything too. What's the threat of the drones? Well, it's this existential crisis that we don't exactly control that may have some agency over me, and I don't like it. Like that's effectively what it really represents. Not that, the drone has a steak knife and it's going to fly into your head. Like that's not going to happen. Right. So why
have forks?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Sports.
Sporks.
I'm
just trying to eat a steak.
So this is everybody trying to figure out where they are, where they stand, where their boundaries are, trying to get like a little bit of agency. And I think if we treat other people like that, with, hey, that's the approach that they're taking, and be patient and understanding, I think that's the best, because ultimately, even the most in your face, you will address me as this, and like this is how, I'm the political correctness police and everything too. That person still has to get a job. That person still has to like pay their bills and everything too. They still have to cooperate with other people, everything too. And I think it's easy to focus on the loudest voices in the wilderness and extrapolate that out to everybody. But I don't think the bulk of people are like that. Like who's
on either side, really.
Yeah.
And that's really the main point, right?
Yeah.
It's not, we're yelling across, whether it's social media or other stuff, polarizing everybody to, well, you must be Attila the Hun because you think Trump should get reelected. Oh, you must be the most, flower child of the star seeds because you think that DEI is the best thing.
One line is not a real place.
Yeah.
How many people are like that on your street? Percentage-wise, how many people are like that on your street? Hardly any, probably zero, right? How many people are like that in your town? Not many, right? So again, these are the loudest voices in the wilderness with a lot of this stuff too. And we get fed a lot of outrage, reactionary content by the algorithms that are on these social media platforms, which other than watching this podcast, you should delete all your social media.
That's right.
That's the best thing you can do for your self-determination and your agency and your mental health, right? Like, none of that stuff is good for you. It's my own personal plug here. I don't have any of that stuff. I just, why argue with strangers over the internet over something you're both wrong about?
Yeah.
Like ultimately, it's not worth it.
I think that's the interesting thing. There's so many keyboard warriors out there, and clearly there's cyberbullying nowadays, and kids are affected by that. You start getting these comments or whatever else on forums and everywhere else on posts, and it's just like, it's amazing how people become so irate and outraged over somebody's comment, and it's just like, who cares? It's like one person writing on the internet, and they're just trolling you, and yet you're going to let this bother you and affect your day, and you're going to go out and kick somebody's dog or do something terrible, and it's just like, for what?
But anytime you get upset, right? Like you get that angry that no one is actually making you upset. You're allowing yourself to get that upset over what, words?
Right.
Who's somebody who does stuff like that too. Think of like how miserable their day to day.
Well, that's
they're minute by minute too. And you're going to give up some of your day, your control, right, to that person. That's exactly what they want, right? Like, what would so imagine, I always like to try to imagine this person, someone who lives on my street, would I give them the time of day? If that's how they actually, but absolutely not.
No.
Right. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a fascinating perspective. And I think all too often today, I think people live on social media now with clearly OnlyFans, all these pages where it's just about, well, let's be honest, it's like people's egos, and they're just sitting there trying to just say, look at me, I'm more important than everybody else.
What's the famous quote? Comparison is the thief of joy.
Yeah.
Right? Like the quickest way to make yourself unhappy is to compare yourself to that stuff and again, like you're going to question everything. You're going to lose purpose. You're going to do, it's just a complete detractor.
Like, so
Yeah. Go ahead.
So what advice would you give to somebody that is rudderless, doesn't have purpose, whether male, female, whatever, if there's, aside from maybe if they didn't want to join the military.
layabout. Yes.
Shiftless layabout.
If they didn't have necessarily a calling to go to the military, what would you give them advice as to how to figure out what their purpose is and steer that ship in the right direction?
Well, first off, to be alive right now in this country, right, and just in the western part of this world, really anywhere in this world right now, you are insanely lucky.
Yeah.
First and foremost, right? This is the absolute best time to be alive as a human. I'll tell you why. Because of about 80-90% of all the human beings who have ever humaned throughout history, you know what their occupation has been? Subsistence farmer. Like,
Yeah.
So all these people, they were just like, oh, like I remember all my past lives and I've been reincarnated. I was a pharaoh and then I was, this nobleman and I was that. Well, that's remarkable because it should have been I was a farmer and then I was another farmer. And then one time I was a farmer followed by another farmer. And then the background just changes behind them. Because, and then think of the life of a subsistence farmer who's trying to like fend off starvation, who never gets to go to school, doesn't get to participate in any kind of war, doesn't get to, have any of these major historical events happen around them. People show up and take stuff from you at sword point, either bandits or like legitimized government taking taxes from your crop. Doesn't matter to you.
That's still happening.
You're still losing. You're still losing stuff.
Nothing's changed on that
what I'm
front.
saying is that like you have all that, and that's a huge leg up. Like that's amazing right there. Like that in and of itself. And this goes to the gratitude piece, right? So just having that is incredible. And then from there, you have the luxury of actually making a job out of stuff that is fun. You want to be the world's foremost expert at throwing cards in a hat? Like I'm sure there's a tournament for that somewhere. You could be like the top end person. Competitive esports is a thing, right? It's incredible. So if you have the luxury where you can take a thing and take it to its utmost, and you can probably make a career out of it. And even if you're not the best at it, you could talk about it. Like you could be a commentator, or you could become an expert and give your opinion on that field or whatever. Like there's so much that you can do. So take something that you love and are passionate about and hang your hat on that. Like lean into that, take it as far as you can and really stick with it too. One, that'll be a test to see, do you really love it? Right? Like if you're willing to basically wake up and go to bed with it every single night. And two, like if it does indeed pass that test, like there's your ticket right there.
Well, we're hoping this is it for us, but
Yeah. Because even
Best of luck.
I think like even Joe Rogan, right? I think Dana White when the UFC was struggling, he approached Joe Rogan and was like, hey, we see you talk about the UFC, if you're really into this. And Rogan was like, wait, so you want me to come on and just sit ringside with the best seats in the world and talk about UFC?
Talk about the thing I love.
He's like, I'm doing this.
Yeah.
And
Sign me up.
I think he did like 13 UFCs for free because he's just like, this is friggin' awesome.
Yep.
So, that's truly where I think if you find the things you love and you're passionate about, which I feel like most people today don't. Let's be honest. I think everybody going to work for the most part just kind of goes through the motions. They're not really necessarily passionate about it.
Yeah, they call it driving to work, not driving to fun, right?
Right. Yeah. But going back to your point, so, with the whole changing the scenery, everybody's slavery. So in your opinion, then, civilization today, you think is more advanced than it has been? Because
absolutely. Yeah.
So if we go back to the pyramids, we go back to some of the ancient times, do you think consciousness and people had a higher level back then versus now?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I don't. because the idea of like self-determination and like us as like, individual people and everything, that's fairly recent. Right? That is a pretty recent invention.
At least in this go around of humanity.
Well, I mean, if we're going yeah. We're invoking Madame Blavatsky and her theosophy stuff. Is that we're going to get into like, let's get Robert Howard out here with Lemuria too while we're at it.
Did he invent that, or was that something that he attributed?
I was looking that up, but like he definitely throws in Atlantis. Too, and that
Hyboria.
And that definitely goes all the way back to it was Plato. Talked about that, but Lemuria I think is more recent. Right, like that's a more recent invention. Like I don't think it goes back to any.
Really?
Yeah, I believe so. I could be wrong. I'm sure somebody will point it out. But
the keyboard warriors might. Not that we're calling our listeners keyboard warriors, but not at all. I mean, I think that's the interesting thing because some of our podcasts we've talked about the young Adrias.
Yes.
Like you look at ancient civilization. The fact that they think the pyramids were built with, hammers and basically copper tools or whatever else.
So I talked about this with Nick, and he actually read this whole thing on pyramids and other things. It's a very orthodox narrative. It's like the orthodox narrative of whatever. It's just it's an apologetics sort of polemic on how it's not anything that's unexpected, and it's exactly.
Because we focus on pyramids and everything, too, right? Because we're just like, they're so interesting, and like, what's actually harder from an architectural and like stone cutting standpoint is the obelisk. Actually, creating and raising an obelisk and like cutting a single piece like that, some of which are still standing, by the way, like 4,600 years after the fact, right?
Right.
It is way harder to actually do that than it is to build a pyramid, right? And the majority of the pyramids were made within a pretty short period of time, relatively speaking. So through the reigns of a couple of pharaohs, like Sneferu and his son Khufu were the two that outside of Giza like made the majority of those. And you kind of see the progression in their architectural style too. You have step pyramids, right? And then eventually there's a bowed pyramid too, where they had to kind of really cut the amount that they were putting up top because the foundation couldn't support it all.
See, that's the whole point, isn't it? It's because they didn't have the technology anymore that they got from the Anunnaki and all the aliens that allowed them to.
There you go.
Agree to disagree. I hate to do this, but is there any chance I can get a bathroom break?
Yeah, we got about 10 minutes left.
Oh, okay.
We're all set. So
yeah.
Can you hang on for?
I'll do my best.
Do your best, me too. I want to pee myself right now.
Like all this coffee and water.
I know.
So unprofessional.
So
gotta stay hydrated. It's like that's the important thing. Keep drinking, people. Exactly. Water, that is.
Water. Yes.
We're not condoning alcohol.
Drinking, people.
With the holidays coming up, you never know. But
yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so you posit that the pyramids.
That word was coming out.
Your favorite word. So, okay.
Good.
Like he doesn't believe.
He's not a believer.
All right.
Not a believer. That
no. Yeah, very, very rigid. Sorry, guys.
Well, nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
We could all be rigid sometimes.
So, how do you feel about the sort of bathtub remnants of what was clearly water at that point that that are displayed on the Sphinx and other things that show that or some people show that there was a river that crossed that way, and it wouldn't have been a river for a much older period than what they're ascribed to have been built from.
I would ask what the carbon dating is on some of the stones and everything too, and then also too you have to think about ancient Egyptian culture too. Like all this stuff was made during the Old Kingdom, right? Like the initial period of.
You talking about the Giza pyramids or the other pyramids?
No, the Giza pyramids.
Yeah,
they're all made around the same time. So they're
agree to disagree.
They were very much into taking credit for what they did, right? Like absolutely. Like you didn't make these like stelas, steles, however you want to pronounce it. They would go conquer an area. They would push into, let's say, Kush. They would go down south, right? They would go down south the Nile. or they would go into toward modern day Syria, Lebanon, everything, and they would go have a battle, and they would erect a monument and be able to look at all the stuff that we did. They would give you dates and like who did it and everything too. And in front of the pyramids, they tell you like who built it and everything too. Like they're very much into taking credit for this stuff. So it helped legitimize the pharaoh's rule and everything too, because Egypt is ancient Egypt is a land, two lands, right? Upper and lower Nile, right? And then even beyond that, it can fracture into the nomes beyond that too, the individual cities and everything too. So it's always trying to be held together, right? So the pharaoh was always trying to legitimize their rule. It's always trying to, and their religion too was very much like keeping people in line, keeping them cohesive, keeping everything, fracturing. So.
Well, you even see Akhenaten, which was one of the first monotheistic.
Right.
He tried this. He moved out of Memphis and worship the one God, the sun god, so to speak.
Yeah.
But there were no hieroglyphics in the pyramids, and so there were no. That sort of flies in the face of that argument on some level. Is we don't really know. I mean, why the pyramids were the way they were, why they were created with those chutes, with the king's chamber, the queen's chamber, which are really just called that, I guess. I mean, I don't know where that came up, the actual verbiage for why it's a queen's chamber or a king's chamber, because nobody was buried there, and there's evidence that nobody was ever buried there.
Well, you have to remember, all of them were looted, with the exception of Tut, right? So,
right, but in the Valley of the Kings and other places, Tut wasn't found in a pyramid.
No, he wasn't. It was this antechamber, side chamber, because he died unexpectedly.
Correct.
We believe, right? So they had to very hastily give him a pharaoh's burial, and then they were on to like the next thing.
Do you believe that pyramids were made to bury pharaohs in?
Yes.
How could you believe that?
It's a belief, and I believe that.
It's a belief, and you believe it. But I'm going to agree to disagree.
I disagree as well, but that's our opinions.
disagree.
That's our opinions.
Yes.
Fair enough.
What would you say? So, being a history buff, how much knowledge did we lose with the burning of Alexandria, and also the Vatican? Clearly, in their archives, have all kinds of relics and other information they don't want us to find out.
Well, I can't really speak to the Vatican because I'm not exactly like an expert on, early Catholicism or anything like that. But with Alexandria, I just finished reading something on this recently. It's less of an actual physical library than it was almost like here, right? Like a college of science. It was really the minds that were brought together under the Ptolemies that were able to like really come there. And what they would do is they would take anybody who came in, they would take their scrolls or anything, and they would immediately transcribe them, give them the copy, and then keep the original too, which is, really class move, right?
Classy move.
But they, it was less the actual scrolls and more it as an academic center. And as power shifted away from Alexandria, away from like the Ptolemaic kingdom, and like we have the rise of Rome and everything too, we get to see that sort of dissipate too. So it's kind of like this morning. So the idea of that, like it being a single structure that like burned down, and like, oh, if we only had like these scrolls, like we could. I think it's less of that and more like the mourning of like this big academic center no longer being viable.
So why do you?
But they had them.
Obviously they had
in the archives there. Clearly.
They did.
Those are a tragedy.
Well, there were also copies, right? It's amazing as much survives as it does. The fact that we have the Iliad and the Odyssey,
right,
in pretty much its entirety. Like there's a lot of literature that survives. It's really quite amazing.
Whoa.
I mean, just the letters from Cicero. That's incredible that we have this correspondence from this statesman who's pivotal, right? The writings of Josephus, during his
Tacitus, the
histories of Tacitus. If we should, a lot of people are like, like Alexander died so young, and everything too. Like, why do you have to die so young? What if his empire continued to? We really should be asking, how did he live as long as he did?
Yeah.
All the stuff that guy did, all the injuries he received, all the things that happened to him and everything, all the plots he survived too, right? Like, same thing with all the literature that survives too. We should be like, how did all of this survive? It's incredible how much of it actually survived. And what they wrote it on too. And with the Egyptians, thank God they wrote everything in stones.
Right.
Or that there's so much pottery that survives, or even in Mesopotamia, like your cuneiform tablets, right? That when a building burns down, they bake and they're forever.
Yep.
And now we can translate them. That's amazing.
It's just amazing throughout human history how much has been destroyed, because you look at the Spanish conquistadors, like wiped out most of the Mayan and Inca stuff, right? It's just like we've lost so much knowledge and vast records because of religion or whatever.
The iconoclastic style behavior too. And, you had it with early Christianity, with, the split between East and West about like, how do we treat idols? There were some iconoclasts there. More recently too, with ISIS and Syria, defacing and destroying a lot of stuff, burning down museums, that hurt, that hurt to watch, people sledgehammer monuments and statues,
And it's always this this idea that it's going to be what it is. But why don't we leave it there? Because I'm sure there's wonderful more stuff to talk about, and we'd love to have you out again sometime.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Nick, for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Part of things.
Yeah.
Till next time, this is Brothers of the Arcana. I am Alex Aldea.
I am Dave Ferrigno. Thank you for joining us today. God bless. And our guest,
Nick Stevens, and because it's right around Christmas time, and all that happy. So we say Happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas, and Happy Holidays. So
Happy Holidays, everybody. Thank you.
And until next time, see you later.
ciao.